Following is a multimedia presentation that is a supplement to the Sustainable Country Living book. The heat grid is the subject of this presentation and dovetails with Chapter 19 in the book, titled Heat Grid. Heating with wood is an important thing to understand if you're wanting to be able to heat your home in a sustainable, long-term way. When we look at America's use of different kinds of heat sources for heating their home, natural gas is almost half. The reason this is the case is because natural gas is plentiful and is very commonly available in the cities. Natural gas is a gas that comes out of the ground just the way it is. I know someone who lived in country property in Alberta who had natural gas so prominent in their soil that when they turned the water faucet on for their well, it would be spitting out natural gas and water. You could take a match and light it, and flames would come out of the faucet. Or you could put it in a glass and let it bubble out, and then you could drink the water. So natural gas is come out of the ground as a gas at the wells and pumped with pipes all the way to the individual homes. Propane, on the other hand, which is similar, it uses similar equipment with the exception of a different orifice. Otherwise, natural gas and propane furnaces and heaters and stoves and ovens can all use the same equipment with just a different orifice. But propane, by comparison, is not natural in the ground. It's a byproduct of crude oil in the process of making gasoline for vehicles. So propane, LPG, liquid propane gas, is actually a liquid, whereas natural gas is an airy gas. It's not a liquid. But when you burn propane, you're burning the fumes, the gas, from the liquid. So if you have a 500-gallon propane tank, it won't be filled up to 500 gallons. It'll be filled up to maybe 450 gallons because there needs to be a space at the top for the fumes because that's what you're burning. Okay, so 50% of American households heat with natural gas. About a third heat using electricity. And propane is a very small amount, 5%. Fuel oil, as in diesel, is the old way of doing it. It's not energy efficient, it's not clean, and it's mostly in old homes. And then you can see wood is only 2%. Now, this is because most population in America lives in cities, and so they would use the handy, cheaper natural gas or electricity. Whereas if you were living a sustainable country property and wanting to be independent from having to buy the materials, wood is a good option. So let's take a look at these different sources of heat. Now, electricity, if you're heating a home, the old traditional way is a baseboard heater. That's a long, skinny unit that's on the floor up against the wall. They're not very efficient, so they're not used very much anymore. Forced air furnaces are a central furnace in the house that is heated with electricity, and then it has ducts that go to each room and come up through registers in the floor. Then you could upgrade that forced air electric furnace to also have a heat pump. And if you have a heat pump, then it also can do air conditioning. And then you could upgrade even further than that and do geothermal heat pump. The heat pump uses the difference in the air temperature outside to help make the furnace more energy efficient in the house, whereas geothermal doesn't use the air, it uses the temperature of the ground about 10 feet down in the ground. A mini split is an even newer innovation with heat pumps, and these are wall-mounted units. They're usually up against the ceiling. If you have a cabin or an open architecture space in a house where, say, you have a great room and a kitchen and everything's kind of open, without a bunch of walls, then mini splits is a really energy efficient, good way to heat with electricity. And then we have diesel oil. That's the old style of oil furnace. Then we have natural gas furnaces, we have propane furnaces, and wood stoves. So now let's take a look at each one of these and figure out what's the best way to go for sustainable country living. First of all, electricity is off the list because electricity can be expensive and it is not as efficient, and the price can change pretty quickly. I know somebody who lives in Illinois and their electric bill raised 3 or 4 times. And so they not only have a heat pump, but they also added solar to help offset the cost of the electric bill. So electricity might be cheap where you live if you're in a state that has hydroelectric dams and things like that, but it can change quickly in the price. And the reason we're striking it out is it's not a sustainable way to heat. If you're off grid, for instance, you're not going to heat with electricity. If you're off grid, you don't want to use solar, for instance, for anything that makes heat. So you wouldn't use it for heating your house. You wouldn't use it for a stove or an oven or a furnace, those kind of things. So electricity's out from a sustainable source for home heat. Diesel is also out because you have to buy it. And it's not something that will be lasting forever without having to turn around and buy some more. Then natural gas is also one we have to strike out because if you live in country property, you won't have natural gas where you live because it's primarily in the populated areas. So that's not going to work. Propane is a good choice in that even though you have to buy it, it is a fuel that doesn't go bad. If you have gas or diesel stored up for a vehicle, for instance, the gasoline will start going bad in a matter of a couple of months. Diesel's a little longer, but they don't have an indefinite shelf life. I experienced gas deterioration in a house we were living in Arizona where it gets hot in the summer. And I took a 5-gallon can of gas that I'd stored for a while. And when I pulled it down, it literally was varnish. It stunk and it wasn't usable. And I had to literally dump it out. So gasoline doesn't last. You can get an additive to put in that called Stables, or there's some other brands as well. But generally, gasoline doesn't last for a long time. But propane, on the other hand, doesn't ever go bad. It has an indefinite shelf life. So the problem with propane is you could run out and you'd have to buy more. If you couldn't buy or sell or it's not available, now you're in trouble. But from a shelf life perspective, propane is ideal compared to these other fuels because it can be stored. So for instance, if you got a big propane tank, 1,000 gallons, let's say, and then the world went to pot or you couldn't buy or sell, you could be sparing with your use of propane and go for a long time because the fuel will not go bad. And then we come to wood. Wood is the perfect solution. If you have country property that has trees on it that you can get firewood from, this is the way to go because if you the wood will never go bad. It's always on the property. And a matter of fact, it grows, so you get more. And if a storm comes along and knocks some trees down in the winter storm, all the better, because then you don't have to cut them down. They're already laying on the ground. And you can just buck them up and split them and have firewood. So the ideal sustainable source for home heat is wood. So we're going to focus on wood for this presentation. The first thing is we're going to learn about firewood. This company, Alcia Firewood Company, is in Oregon State, and they are going to explain all the ins and outs of what you need to know about firewood.
The first thing to go over is the difference between hardwoods and softwoods. Softwood comes from single-stemmed evergreen trees with needles. These are also called conifers. Hardwood comes from multi-stemmed deciduous trees with wide leaves. These are also called broadleaves. There are various exceptions to these rules about hardwoods and softwoods, but they're mainly true. The most common types of softwoods are Douglas fir, true firs, spruce, pine, cedar, and hemlock. The most common types of hardwoods are oak, ash, maple, and alder. In most cases, you can count on hardwoods to be denser than softwoods, and therefore contain more heat. But this isn't always true. Pound for pound, each type of firewood contains about the same amount of energy as any other type. But some types are much heavier than others. When researching firewood, you can't get very far without coming across the acronym BTU. A BTU, or British Thermal Unit, is the amount of energy it takes to raise the temperature of 1 pound of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit. With all that information, let's go check out different types of firewood. This is oak, the king of firewood here in central western Oregon. Oak supplies about 24 million BTUs per cord. This is maple, the favorite firewood of many. Maple supplies about 19 million BTUs per cord. This is alder. Light and easy to handle, alder supplies about 15 million BTUs per cord. This is Doug fir. While most softwoods supply about 14 million BTUs per cord, Doug fir comes in first at 17 million. Softwoods generally burn hotter and faster than hardwoods. They're great for lighting fires and creating a quick bed of coals. Hardwoods generally burn longer than softwoods and are great for keeping your house warm over those cold, rainy nights. The next thing to go over is what a cord of wood is. A cord is 128 cubic feet of stacked firewood, or 180 cubic feet of loose firewood. Here at the LC Firewood Company, we stockpile all of our firewood in quarter cord size bags. The amount of firewood consumed by a household varies widely and is dependent upon a number of factors. In Western Oregon, your average wood-burning family consumes about 4 cords of firewood per year. The next thing to cover is how to determine if your wood is dry enough to burn. When wood is freshly cut, it may be around 50% moisture content. The industry standard for seasoned wood is 20%. Here at the LC Firewood Company, we aim for 15% or less. There are several methods you can use to determine if your wood is dry enough to burn. The first is weight. Seasoned wood is always much lighter than green wood of the same type. The second method is the bark. The bark of seasoned wood is often missing or easily removed. The third method is sound. Seasoned wood makes a hollow clink, like bowling pins. The fourth method is cracks. Seasoned wood often contains cracks at both ends. While these methods are useful in determining whether or not your wood is ready to burn, there's only one sure way of determining the moisture content of your firewood. For that, you'll need an axe and a moisture meter. First, find some large pieces of firewood near the center of your pile or stack. Then, touch your moisture meter to the freshly split face. This Douglas fir is at 7% moisture content. This alder is at 6% moisture content. This oak is still at 21% moisture content. Lastly, we'll cover how to store your firewood and how to build a great fire. Storing your firewood properly isn't complicated. Just make sure your woodshed is dry and well ventilated. Direct sunlight is always a plus. There are many methods to build a great fire, and we'll cover just one. First, gather your tinder. Paper and dryer lint work great. Next, grab your kindling. Any small pieces of firewood or bark will work fine. Then grab your small fuel and your large fuel. Add a piece of large fuel to the back of your stove. Add your tinder, your kindling, and your small fuel. Next, the fun part. Go ahead and light your fire. When you've got a good bed of coals, begin adding your large fuel and enjoy the heat.
So the firewood basics that we learned is softwood trees are evergreen trees. That means they're trees that don't lose their leaves during the winter, and they have cones. Like we say pine cones. Well, a pine tree has a pine cone, but all evergreen trees have cones, which is where the seeds come from. Hardwood trees, on the other hand, are deciduous. They're the ones that have the broad leaves, and the leaves fall off in the fall, so they're bare in the winter. Softwood trees can include Douglas fir, spruce, pine, cedar, and hemlock. Hardwood trees can be oak, ash, maple, and alder. And then the term BTU is British Thermal Unit, and that is 1 pound of water temperature raised by 1 degree. So 1 pound of water raising the temperature by 1 degree is a British thermal unit. And then a cord of wood is a 4 by 4 by 8 load of wood. So that's probably a little bit more than a pickup could hold if it was a big pickup. And this individual in Oregon said that the average family needs about 4 cords for a year to heat their home. So then we talked about the importance of burning dry wood. I can tell you from personal experience, if you don't properly dry your firewood, then you can have a problem with creosote building up in the chimney and then starting a chimney fire. And I can tell you from personal experience that a chimney fire is very scary and something you want to avoid. So burning dry wood is more efficient. It limits the creosote buildup in the chimney. It avoids chimney fires, and that results in the target of being 20% moisture content or less. And ways to tell if the wood is dry: by the weight. Heavier it is, the more moisture it has in it. If the bark falls off or is gone, it's probably dry. Thunk them together. If it sounds like a bowling pin, then it's probably dry. If it has cracks on both ends, it's probably dry. But a moisture meter is the best way to tell. And the way you do that is you find a block of wood in the middle of your stack and split it in half, and then use the moisture meter in the middle where you just split it to get the most accurate reading of how much moisture. If you don't split it and measure it on the outside, as I've seen some people do, you're not getting an accurate read because it'll dry from the outside in. Okay, now we're going to talk about different forms of fire heating units. One is a fireplace, a stove, and a kitchen wood stove. Chad Cruiser has a YouTube channel called Health and Homestead, and he hailed from South Dakota, but I believe he lives in Tennessee now. And here he will explain his approach to firewood and the use of it in stoves.
Traditionally, houses in the United States, many of them, the older houses, have fireplaces. Fireplaces are great because they produce a little bit of heat, and they create a beautiful ambiance in the house. It's just a very nice experience. The trouble with traditional fireplaces is that they really aren't efficient. So they burn up a lot of wood and they don't give you a lot of heat in exchange for that wood. The good thing is that you can actually get an insert and place that inside many of the old fireplaces, and this can actually, some of them will have a fan that will blow the heat back into the house, and this is much more efficient for you if you're thinking of heating with wood. Standard fireplaces generally are not the best option to give you the most heat per amount of wood that you're burning. What's becoming more and more popular is the standard wood stove. Now these go back hundreds of years. I mean, the oldest wood stove is probably like from the 1600s, that at least is extant that we still have today. But these have been around for hundreds of years, and the thing about them is they put out a ton of heat. They're heating from all directions. This one here has some heat shields so that you can put it closer to the wall, or the wall over here. But these right here are just fantastically efficient. They heat your house. There's almost nothing like wood heat. As they put off that infrared heat, they heat the furniture, they heat the walls. You think, well, doesn't that happen when you have a standard furnace in the house? To a very, very small degree, but typically it just heats the air, and then once it's gone, the house is heated for a bit, and then it has to flip back on. But these, I put some wood in there at night, and this is not an unbelievably efficient one, but it is quite efficient. It's not like some of the Blaze Kings. I mean, if you've got the money, a Blaze King, they may be $3,000-$4,000 plus, but those things, you can fill them up, and you can, once you get the fire going well, and they have catalytic converters, those ones, this one does not have a catalytic converter. Once you get that catalytic converter running, you can turn them down, and that thing can go for 2, maybe almost 3 days on one load of wood. Now that's incredible, and you can imagine why people love getting a Blaze King. But for us who we're starting off and we don't have all kinds of money, we go a cheaper route like this. But even this one here, I can put my wood in at night, I can wake up in the morning, the house is still decently comfortable. I mean, 67 is not too bad. I mean, it's a little on the cool side, but it warms right up. I come down here and start it off in the morning. So wood stove's an option. The next option is the wood cook stove. If you're looking to cook your food, I mean bake bread and these kinds of things, or cook pizza or whatever it is, wood cook stove, especially if you're making that your main option, you're off the grid, or you're just thinking, hey, maybe there's going to be difficult times, having a wood cook stove is a great option. I don't have a wood cook stove. They do cost more money. They're a fantastic option. But the good news is I can cook on this one. You can get these metal risers called trivets, or I can just set things on here, and we warm up. Just today we warmed up some of our food over on this section here because it's not as hot as over here. And with a trivet, you can be boiling your water, you can be cooking things right here. But if you really, really want to be doing things like baking, the wood cook stove is a great option for you.
Okay, fireplaces, stoves, and kitchen wood stoves. A fireplace is not very efficient, and you can make it better by putting a fireplace insert. Our first country home, we had a Blaze King stove, and it heated the house really well. We could run all night and halfway into the next day without having to put more wood in. They're a great stove. The second country home we made, we decided to be a little more aesthetically pleasing. So in the family room, we built a fireplace alcove and then put an insert in it. And I can tell you from experience, that does not do anywhere near as good a job in heating a house as does a standalone fire stove. Even with the fan running, which made an annoying sound, it didn't heat the room very much. So our experience with the fireplace insert, though it looked nice, it didn't do what you'd want to do if you're actually going to heat your house with it. It's nice for ambiance and sitting around a fire, but not if you're trying to heat the house. The wood stove is the way to go, and that can be just a regular wood stove, like a Blaze King, or you can do a kitchen wood cook stove. So using an antique wood stove, this lady is going to explain how people back in the day used a kitchen wood stove. This is from Delaware County in Ohio. Video clip. So using an antique wood stove, the problem is the antique ones have a small firebox. They weren't designed to heat the house. They were designed to either heat a small house, but mostly to cook, and you're kind of burning kindling all the time. And so you do a lot more labor for the wood, and it's not as energy efficient or creating enough heat to heat your house. But it is good for cooking and baking and warming and making hot water. Now we had, in our first country home, we had the Blaze King in the living room, and around the corner sharing the same chimney was a antique kitchen wood stove that we bought in Alberta. It was an old original, and it was kind of a emergency cooking apparatus. We only actually used it once in all the years we lived there because it does a lot of labor to make an antique wood kitchen stove function. But we enjoyed having it, and we learned that we would rather have one that's a modern kitchen wood-burning stove that has a big firebox so it can heat the house. Now, this gentleman is living in Amish country, and he and his wife live like the Amish do, and he's going to tell about their kitchen wood-burning stove.
For the last 14 years, my wife and I have lived in this log cabin just like the Amish. We heat with a wood cook stove. We live off 100% rainwater. We grow 90% of our own food. And today I'm going to show you guys how the Amish keep warm in the winter. So what we have here is what you call a wood cook stove. I don't know, maybe you watched some old Western movies back in the day. This is basically the heart of the homestead. A lot of different wood stoves that you can get on the market, different sizes. Each size is going to heat a different amount of square foot of your house. Now this particular brand right here is called the Pioneer Princess. And this wood stove is actually made by the Amish. You guys don't think it maybe, but this puts off so much heat it could actually run you out of your house. On this particular model, Pioneer Princess, you have a thermostat right here so you can see what your oven temperature is doing. I'm going to show you guys how to adjust your oven temperature. You pull the door down, and then there's your oven. Next up, you have your firebox. This is where you put your wood. I don't want to open it too fast because it'll smoke into the house if you open it up too fast. So you open it up nice and slow. Because I have it choked down right now, which means it's not producing a lot of fire. See, it's mostly coals in there. It'll take a second, that wind will start hitting and it'll get fired up. See that? Okay? Because when you're in your house and you're just kind of hanging out, you're just maintaining your temperature, so you don't need flames and big roaring fires, okay? Unless you're baking or doing something. So that's enough heat in the house to sustain you. There's about 3 or 4 pieces on there. All the smoke staying inside, going up the chimney because that's what you want. And then down here is the clean out box. The wood cook stove is very utilitarian, which means it has a lot of functions just for one piece. That's one thing we like to do here at our place, our off-grid homestead, is we always talk about things that you can get that have multiple uses. So this is excellent. This is also where we get our hot water. On the back of the stove here, there's a silver tank, stainless steel. Forget how many gallons that is. There's a lever right here, and then inside there is some hot water. I don't want to put my hand too hard in there. Oof. And you have to make sure you keep this filled up full of water, otherwise you could warp it and mess it up. So there's always water in there. And here's your hot tip. You always have to have water on your stove. See, there's always a big pot of water. See that? Always a big pot of water on the stove because this wood heat is so pure and natural and good, but it sucks out all the moisture in the air, so you have to help put moisture back into the air. Otherwise, it'll get really dry on you. So there's always water going on the big pot and on the back. Top is just like a griddle. We've never used it for a griddle, but that's how it looks. Now that's going to take a little bit of maintenance for you to keep that clean. You know, you could spill stuff on it. It swipes off pretty good. Every morning in the morning before we fire up our first fire after it's been smoldering overnight, Stacy rubs it down with a little, like a sanding pad, but it's a soft one. And we just go straight across in one direction, and that's it. And it just stays pretty good like that. Also right here we have like a warming tray. Stacy also uses that as a dehydrator. You could dry some dishes in there apparently. And then also you have some spots up there where she dries some dishes as well.
So this gentleman's stove, it's a kitchen wood-burning stove. It's made by the Amish people. Amish are a sect of people in North America who live the old way. They travel by buggy and horses, and they don't have electricity in their homes. And so they intentionally live an off-grid kind of lifestyle. This stove has a thermostat, and on the front of the door has a good-sized firebox, so you could heat your house with it. Has an oven, a warming tray, hot water reservoir. Underneath the firebox is a cleanout box, and it has the ability to heat water. In this particular case, it's important with any of these stoves, even a regular freestanding stove or a kitchen stove. If you're heating with wood, you're going to dry the air out in your house, so you need to have a pot of water going all the time so that it puts a little bit of steam in the air to combat everything being so dry. Now we're going to look at a gentleman who refurbishes professionally antique wood stoves. In case you decide you want to have an antique one, this gentleman will show you how revolutionary it can be. And this gentleman lives in New Hampshire.
The shingle hanging above the front porch at Jim Evans' place in Orford is deceiving.
And that's on purpose.
His yard littered with rusty, broken, antique wood cook stoves.
They think that's what I'm selling. Yeah, and I let it go that way.
Old Glenwoods, Crawfords, and Atlantics dating back more than a century. Concealed from the roadside, his showroom.
Even most of the people in this town don't even know what's inside that door.
Many of the stoves here at Evansville Antique Stove Company were nearly lost to history. Jim hunts them down. Estate sales, old houses, even junkyards scattered all over the Northeast. His critical eye always on the lookout in the most unlikely places. Stoves with promise are disassembled in the next shed. Jim's teaching his granddaughter, Brittany Severance, craftsmanship of a bygone era.
Not very common amongst people my age, but they're pretty cool.
We sandblast all the parts to get them down to bare metal.
Nickel pieces are replated, other parts painted, and resealed with new nuts and bolts, and then reassembled and returned to their original splendor.
So Karen, this is the shop where the magic happens.
Jim and Brittany are reviving an 1898 Glenwood they picked up in Vermont.
The house was falling down, and I got it from the salvage crew, but it had spent its whole life in that house. This makes it airtight. It acts as a glue.
The process is long and laborious. Jim puts 60 hours into each stove. He's one of only a handful of people in New England practicing the trade.
Everything look all right? You want to hit it with the hammer?
Brittany is a strong apprentice at her grandfather's elbow during days off from her job as an architectural designer.
Look, we're going to put the end shelf on. I'll see if it fits, Brittany. Okay. Oh, look at that.
Perfect fit.
Like a glove.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. I don't think there's a stove he's completed that I haven't loved.
This is the beautiful Home Grand warming closet. It goes on top of that same stove. This is the top of the line, the Cadillac of the stoves for 1898.
The finished product, a major transformation.
The most rewarding part is to see the customer's face when they are brought back to the shop to see their stove unveiled. And many, many times they've tried to ask if it's the same one because they can't believe it.
Which brings us back to what's behind that showroom door.
Come on in, Karen, and
my gosh, they're gorgeous. 100-year-old stoves refurbished to mint condition, looking like the tarnish of carbon had never darkened their iron doors. Before and after pictures show Jim's intricate work. While these refurbished stoves are fully functional, they're in demand as showpieces, burning with nostalgia.
they like them because their grandmother had one. They remember it, and they want one even if it's just to look at.
long-lost gems return to their rightful place in our homes.
So the steps for refurbishing an antique wood stove is you disassemble it. You will notice that the lady, his granddaughter, used a cutting torch to cut the bolts off because a lot of times those bolts are so rusted in you can't get them off. And so she just takes a shortcut and cuts them off with a torch. The shiny chrome looking stuff is actually nickel plating. And then to clean up the nickel plating, which is the chrome looking parts, if it's not in too bad a shape, what I've done is if you get extremely fine steel wool, then you can rub that nickel plating without scratching it, but it will clean it up really nice, including the areas that are kind of imperfect. And it'll be surprising how well that works. We've done that on restoring cars with chrome bumpers and stuff, and it's amazing how a little bit of rubbing with some really fine steel wool will revolutionize the chrome. Then the bare metal, you can clean it. They sandblasted, but you could just do it with a wire brush or sandpaper. The main thing is you want to get it down, get the loose stuff off. And then my little trick is there's a product that we call stove black, kind of like shoe polish, and you smear it on there. And if you do these two steps with the fine steel wool on the shiny stuff and stove black on the black, you'll be amazed at how nice that stove's going to look in just a few minutes. Now this lady again is going to talk about how a summer kitchen works, because if you're living with that as your cooking source, then when it's harvesting time and you need to do canning, you're not going to want to do that in the house because the stove's hot, it's hot weather. So here's a summer kitchen outside.
Many people had summer kitchens behind the main house. So that was a smaller building behind the house, and this stove could be taken apart in the spring, cleaned really well, and reassembled in the summer kitchen. Sometimes you might actually have an extra range in the summer kitchen if you were well-to-do. But the point of it was you did all the cooking out there, canning, anything that involved the stove, and of course to do laundry, you're going to heat several big pans of water all day to do your laundry. And so by having a summer kitchen in which to do all that, it kept the house cool.
Here's a picture showing the water steaming on a pot on the stove to add moisture into the air. And here's another picture with a pot doing some cooking and creating steam in a pot on a wood stove. You'll notice this one's not a cook stove and it still has a shelf where you can do that. And this picture is showing another way to make hot water. This is a range boiler connected up to the stove. You have a coil above the flames in the firebox with two copper pipes, and it goes into a equivalent of a hot water tank, but it doesn't have elements in it. It's called a range boiler. It's a little thicker metal, but you could use a hot water tank if you wanted. The key is you have it a little bit higher than where the pipes come out in the stove. And by doing that, heat rises, so the hot water will go up and then cool water will go back in, and it'll circulate without the need for a pump. And if you do that or any other kind of hot water tank, you'd need to have a pressure relief valve. The purpose of that, especially with a range boiler, it will get so hot that it would create a problem. And so a pressure relief valve, if it gets too much pressure because it's too hot, it will expel the extra out through the pipe, which goes outside the house and dumps on the ground. So that's a safety feature that you would need if you did a range boiler. And this is somebody else's idea. If you have stovepipes that are not insulated, and a lot of the new stovepipes are like triple wall, so this wouldn't work. But if you just have a regular bare stovepipe coming out of your stove, you could take copper tubing and go around the pipe to collect the heat. And with the tank higher, it would automatically circulate, just like we showed before. And just for fun, this is a hot tub that's heated by a wood stove. To the right is where the wood goes in a stainless steel fire pit. You can see a chimney coming up the back. My brother had one of these, and it was quite novel to have it out on the deck and everything, but he soon learned the problem is that if you want to use the hot tub, you have to plan ahead of time several hours to get that hot enough to be useful. And usually when you want to go in a hot tub, you're doing it kind of on the spur of the moment. So it ends up not being very practical to have a hot tub that's running on wood. Now this family lives in the Canadian wilderness in an outpost area. And she's going to explain a flame view kitchen wood stove. This is an Amish-made stove that's fairly popular. It has a big firebox that can heat the house, and it can also do all the other things that kitchen wood stoves can do, but it's doing it more efficiently than it is with an antique one.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about wood stoves. We moved into this cabin in the winter, and one of the first things we needed to get in order to be in here was a wood stove. And we had a few major things that we were looking for in a wood cook stove. Number one, we wanted to be able to heat our house with it. We wanted to be able to cook off of it. And we wanted to have a range boiler set up eventually so we can have our hot water piped through the stove to heat it. So the stove that we ended up getting was a Margin Flame View, as you can see here. Margin is a company out of Ontario, an Amish company. And so we had this stove brought out from Ontario. It was actually a 10-year-old stove, and so we got an awesome deal on it. And so I'm going to just show you a little bit about the stove, kind of some positives, negatives. If you're looking for a wood stove for your homestead, or you're just interested in how these work, I'll just let you follow along here. So this is the warming oven here. It's been really great for dehydrating food, for keeping things warm when you're cooking multiple items. The stovepipe actually goes right up through it, so it kind of keeps it pretty warm in there when you got the stove going. So this stove has a cast iron top, and the firebox is actually right in this area. So when you have your fire going real good, this is going to be your hottest area for cooking. So if you're trying to boil some water, this is where you're going to put your pot. And as you move to the right, it gets a lot cooler. And so if you just want something to simmer or just cook really low, this is the area that you're going to put your pots and pans. You'll start to notice if you have a stove like this that if your bread isn't baking properly and your oven temperatures are not warm enough, it's probably because you need to do a good clean out. So that's what we were doing earlier. So I'll show that to you later. So moving on down to the oven. This oven is a pretty decent size. It comes with one rack and multiple settings as to how high you want it. It does have a thermometer here, which isn't completely accurate, but it does tell you that the oven's getting hotter, and I've kind of figured out how it works for me. And then below that, there's a drawer where you can put your pans and different things. Gets pretty hot in there also. And I'm actually going to go ahead and put my cornbread in because the oven's getting hot enough and we're having cornbread today. And I can get 2 9x13 pans sideways in there if I need to. So that is the oven. So here we can see the firebox. This stove has a 22-inch wide firebox, so you can fit some pretty decent sized pieces in there. You can see there's some dampers here. This one is a damper. This is the lever that allows the airflow to direct around the oven area. So when I'm cooking, as I am right now, I have it to this side, and when I'm not cooking, I just flip it over to that side there. Down below as well, you see there's more dampers. These are kind of some big dampers that spin. And down here there's little doors, and in there is where you clean out all your ashes. On the back of the stove here you can see there's 2 pipes coming out, and that is where the coils are that go through the firebox and heat your water. So eventually we will have a range boiler hooked up to that, and we'll be able to heat our water in our cabin. So a couple drawbacks to this stove just that should be highlighted here. This stove is actually bolted together, it's not welded, and so there are definitely some cracks. It's considered an airtight stove, but if you don't have your chimney nice and clean and you don't have a really good draft going up the chimney, what can happen and has happened to us is little puffs of smoke can come out a few of the cracks when you have your dampers all closed. And so that happened a few times. Once we had the chimney cleaned out really good, it doesn't really happen, but you just kind of have to be aware of that. The other thing is that it doesn't seem to hold an overnight burn as well as some. It doesn't damp down as well as some stoves because there are these little cracks. And sometimes in the middle of the winter when it's really cold, we do end up getting up in the middle of the night and adding another log on the fire because it kind of burns up faster than it should. Other than that though, it's great for cooking. It heats our house really well. Our house is 1,200 square feet and it has no trouble heating the house.
So this particular one is made by Margin. It's a flame view model, and it's Amish made in Canada. It has a warming oven, has a cast iron top, thermometer on the door, which doesn't work very accurately, has a storage drawer for pots and pans underneath the oven, has a large fire box with a window so you can see the fire, which is nice, and it has dampers and clean out drawers underneath the firebox. And it can be added to have a water coil so you could do the range boiler affair. Or this same flame view can have an optional water tank on the side, which extends the burning top to be bigger, the cooktop. So that's one option that she didn't have in that particular one that they bought. The things that are negative about this particular brand, and I can tell you that from my personal experience, is they're a beautiful stove. They look really nice. They work great, but they're not really airtight, even though they're claimed to be airtight. They're not completely airtight. This individual in the video explained how the cooktop has cracks and is bolted together. And so that, in her opinion, creates a way to get air in there to make the fire burn quicker. I think one solution to that might be, you'll notice the guy that was doing the restoring the antique stoves used some kind of white putty stuff. I don't know what it is, but it might be that that or black silicone or something could be used to seal those cracks. In my opinion, even though the door on the stove is airtight, it's got vents above it that I think are the problem. So if a person took and permanently kept them shut and black silicone around the cracks, I think it would be airtight. Benefits of heating with wood: it's the only available fuel that you could grow on your own property. Because you can do that, it's renewable, because the trees keep growing and you can cut them down and there'll be more growing. So it's renewable. It's also sustainable because you don't have to go buy wood if you don't want to. If you can't buy or sell, then having wood on your property is a real plus. If you think about when you couldn't buy or sell at all for whatever reason, the problem is if you ran out of fuel and oil for your chainsaw, now what? So if you want to plan for being completely sustainable, even in hard times, it would behoove you to have an axe and a wedge and a couple of types of hand saws, the old logging type misery whips, some people call them. And if they're sharpened properly, they work really quite good. But it's an old lost art, and that's something to keep in mind if you're really trying to be sustainable for tough times. So that is an overview of heating with wood. I'm a big fan of it. It's pretty hard to beat the comfort that a wood fire provides. It just goes right to your bones. It really feels good. It's nothing like any of these other electric or oil or any of those types of things. Wood heat is very comfortable, and it does give you the option to be sustainably independent. To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.